My name is Ivan Heiberg, and I'm the Honorary Consul General for Norway here in Minnesota. And it is my pleasure to welcome so many of you to this webinar. Before we start, I just want to share a couple of announcements. The Norwegian Consulate launched a webinar series earlier this spring, and this is the third in this series. Our next webinar will be focused on smart city solutions in Norway, and our planned date for this is August 31st. So please mark your calendars accordingly if this is of interest to you. Also, for anyone interested and eligible to vote in the upcoming parliamentary election in Norway, please check out our consulate website or reach out to us for more details on how you can come into our office to vote in person. And again, our contact information should, you can find that in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. This webinar will be recorded, and we are planning to make it available afterwards on the consulate website as well. And before I introduce our special presenter, I want you to know that we will move into the Q&A session after the presentation. And starting now, we certainly encourage you to submit questions that you may want to ask the ambassador by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And my colleagues, Vice Consul Britt Ardakani and Consular Officer Ragnhild Hjeltnes will help curate questions, which will be asked of the ambassador after her presentation is complete. So with that, let's move on to the topic you are also interested in and you're here for. Here at the Norwegian Consulate, we get a multitude of questions on what it is like in Norway today. As a relatively small country, Norway has world recognition due to its consistent top ranking of having the happiest citizens, as well as forward-thinking social, economic, and labor policies that have paved the way for today's modern Norway. And thanks to Will Ferrell and GM, some of Norway's electric vehicle programs and policies were showcased in a variety of Super Bowl ads earlier this year, which gained Norway even more global attention. And here to further talk about what modern Norway looks like today, it is my immense pleasure to introduce you to our special guest and speaker today, Norway's ambassador to the United States, Anniken Ramberg Krutnes. Welcome, Ambassador Krutnes.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to all of you who are joining us today. And of course, I will also thank Ivan's colleagues, Britt Ardakani and Ragnhild Hjeltnes, for putting this together. I know how much goes into planning these events, so thank you for that. Norway's Honorary General Consulate in Minneapolis does a great job providing Norwegian interests and assisting Norwegians and Norwegian Americans alike. So let me just state that your efforts are very much appreciated. So thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to all of you today. I have been here for 8 months as Norway's ambassador to the US, and I must say I arrived at a very unusual time. It has been rewarding to take on this new role, and it has been challenging. Minneapolis is actually one of the few places that I have been able to visit so far. I had a very productive visit last fall, and one of the highlights was meeting the late Walter Mondale, an impressive statesman and a friend of Norway. So I hope I will be able to come back to the Midwest soon. Today I've been asked to speak about Norway's approach to capitalism, or what I like to call capitalism with a heart. Let me just make clear that this is not meant as a value judgment. I'm not saying that other brands of capitalism are heartless. What I'm saying is that in the Norwegian model, while we have an open, market-driven economy, and while we do, of course, value the almighty kroner, our currency, the creation of inclusive growth is part and parcel of any economic policy we have. Everybody should be able to be a part of our economy. So in the Norwegian model, everyone should participate both in working life and in society in general. And we believe that this is important for securing economic growth and for building a resilient society. I will start off by providing some context, discussing the current effects of the pandemic on the Norwegian economy, followed by outlook for coming year. Then I will talk a bit about how the Norwegian system operates, our economic system, labor market, tax policy. And then I will talk about the things that truly sets Norway apart, the gender equality, the economic effect of women's empowerment, and the ways in which efforts to reach gender equality are woven into so many aspects of our public policy. I will briefly discuss the educational system, and then I will try to wrap up by taking a look at the long view, the next 30 or 40 year outlook for the Norwegian system, which will give me an opportunity to mention two of the topics very high on the agenda in Norway today: the green transition and innovation. I'm sure some of you know quite a bit already of Norway and how we have organized ourselves. So bear with me if some of this is already known and familiar to you. And I look very much forward to your questions and comments after the presentation. So where do we stand right now in Norway? Well, of course, the economic crisis caused by the pandemic is characterized by the increase in inequality that it has created across groups, genders, communities, and countries. And we will be working on closing those gaps for a long time. But after a year of economic downturn, I'm glad to see that the global growth curve is pointing in the right direction. The US economy seems to be back on track, driving global growth. I heard the OECD is predicting between 6 and 7% of the growth in the US economy this year. The slide you see is in Norwegian, but the graph is the important, and it can be universally understood. And it is the GDP of Norway. And you will see that the first wave of the pandemic led to an abrupt downward turn in our output, but then it tapered off much faster in Norway than in many other countries, and we just had a few dumps after that. We had a few close downs afterwards. And the growth this year is expected to be around 3.5 to 4%. You will know that we closed down 6 weeks from March last year. Schools were closed, kindergartens were closed, but then we were able to open up again, and we've, at least schools have been open since. And then we've had a few periods where we had to close again, bars, restaurants, all that, and that is what you will see from the graph. But you see, we're picking up really fast back to normal economy. A few words about what characterizes the Norwegian economy. Norway is an open economy, strongly dependent on trade. If you compare it to the US economy, less than 30% of GDP in the US comes from trade. In Norway, the number is more than 70%. And rules for global trade are therefore vital to our companies, and it is a top priority for the Norwegian government. Global rule-based trade. Norway's economy is strongly dependent on the ocean, and Norway is at the forefront of ocean research and responsible marine resource management. Our coastline is one of the longest in the world. It is the longest in Europe. And the marine areas we manage are more than 5 times as large as our land territory. Many thousands of Norwegians spend their workdays in one of the ocean industries, within oil, gas, maritime, seafood sectors. And these industries together are so large that they account for nearly 70% of Norwegian export earnings. So it's safe to say that we live from the ocean. We have a blue economy. At the same time, and very characteristic for our economy, is that inequality is low in Norway compared to most other OECD countries. And policies are in place to create a safety net for individuals and families, and for the redistribution of wealth to finance such a safety net. So let's look at some of the policies. And I will start with gender equality. And you will know that many Norwegian policies are there to help parents balance family life with careers. And I'll try not to burn you with too many numbers, but here are a few. They are from 2018, and they say that in households with 2 small children, 81% of women and 93% of men work. So you will see that both the father and the mother are out working during the day. And this is by design. It's the result of sound targeted policies and political priorities. Women's economic empowerment historically lies at the heart of Norway's economic policies. It was our focus mainly back in the 70s, and since then we've had it like that. And gender equality means realizing the potential of the entire population, not just half of it. A small story here. 10 years ago, I was Norway's ambassador to the Netherlands, and I accompanied the Dutch king on an official visit to Norway. And he visited Stortinget, Parliament, and this was 2011, so it was right after the financial crisis. And the Dutch king said to our Speaker of Parliament, "Oh, Norway came through the financial crisis so easy because you have a lot of oil and gas." And the Speaker of Parliament said, "Well, but you know, the real reason that we came through the crisis and that we have such a strong economy is that we have women in the workforce." And the Norwegian women's participation rate is 20% higher than global average. We would like to see it even higher, so we continue to work on this. And we do that, as I said, policies that make it easier for men and women, particularly those with young children, to work while at the same time raising a family. And part of that is, and many of you know that, the generous parental benefit system to allow mothers and fathers to combine work, life and family. You get approximately 1 year of fully paid leave when you have a child. 1/3 of that leave is reserved for the mother, 1/3 is reserved for the father, only he can take that leave, and 1/3 is for them to share however they choose, but not at the same time. And then you see these wonderful, beautiful children with their backpacks. They are probably in a daycare center, and we have low-cost subsidized daycare and preschool widely available. And most of the daycare centers like to have children outdoor as much as possible. And that's why we still, as adults, love to be outdoor. We're so used to it. And you are also outdoor people in Minnesota. Elementary schools have programs for children after school hours until 4th grade, so that parents don't have to pick them up at 1 p.m. Sorry, not 1 a.m. from school. Sorry. Giving parents of young children the opportunity to build 2 careers provides a foundation for an employment market where the gender is not an issue. and everyone has the same opportunities. It is completely acceptable also for both men and women to leave office after normal work hours, not working overtime, because they have to take the kids to soccer practice, whatever. And I must say that this model where we can have a splendid career while at the same time having a satisfying family life is one of the things I value most in the Norwegian model. The thinking behind this extends beyond government to the private sector, and you would know that Norway has quotas for representation of each gender on the boards of publicly listed companies. By law, at least 40% of board members of publicly traded companies must be from each gender. And the law in Norway is gender neutral. It never says you should have at least 40% women or at least 40% men. It's just each gender. We are very, that's a trademark. We try to do everything gender neutral. Today, Germany, France, Belgium, and Iceland and Italy are among the countries that have since followed suit with mandatory quotas on boards of companies. And then, we have women in politics. Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Chief Justice, President and Vice President of Parliament are all women. Despite that fact, we see that men are overrepresented in the private sector and executive positions, and only 1 in 5 of chief executives in our 200 largest companies are women. So there's still a way to go, but we're not doing it that bad. Education system. I think that another important building block in developing a sustainable society with a heart is the world-class research and education. An educated populace is a happy, productive one, and knowledge drives the innovation that helps develop today the new green profitable jobs. So we believe that high quality education should be free and accessible for everyone. So primary and secondary education are free, as they are in most countries. But in Norway, public universities and colleges are also generally tuition free, all the way through postgrad and doctoral degrees. And this is for all successful applicants, regardless of nationality. Norway has more than 20 states universities and colleges with no tuition, and at the same time we have Lånekassen, the state educational loan fund, which is a government agency that provides loans and grants to Norwegians and certain foreign students to help them deal with the living costs while pursuing their education. So this support makes higher education accessible to students without regard to the family background and the family economic situation. It depends on your intellectual capacity, whether you will have that high education or not. So students in Norway receive a top-notch education taught in modern facilities and using the most current methods. I think I will add that critical thinking is encouraged. Professors are accessible, approachable, and the academic atmosphere is encouraging and informal. One of the things that gets most traction now in Norwegian education is that we teach social media literacy. We want kids from a young age to develop a critical sense of what they see in social media. And we think this is important to build resilience against fake news, disinformation, and actually polarization of the society. I'll move to healthcare system. Just a few words as it plays an integral part in our model. Universal access to healthcare is the foundation, and it secures the right to essential medical and care services for anyone living in Norway. The system is financed through different forms of taxation, and some limited out-of-pocket payments. And this provides people security of knowing that they will receive treatment in case of illness without regard to their financial situation. I want to say a few words about how we organize the labor market. At its core, there's the idea that employers, employees, and government, instead of having an adversarial relationship, can work closely together. And we call this the tripartite cooperation. One benefit of this model is the highly coordinated wage bargaining, which happens every year and which historically has compressed the distribution of wages and reduced inequality in income and wealth. There's a lot of predictability and there's trust between those three groups, the employers, the employees, and government. And with an open dialogue among the parties, unpredictable circumstances such as the pandemic can be adapted to and addressed more nimbly. So if you're wondering how do we pay for all this, the education, the healthcare, well, you might think oil. Well, it's a part of it. The petroleum sector contributed in 2021, but well, that's this year. So this year it will contribute with around 10% of the government's revenues. That's including the corporate tax from the companies operating on the Norwegian shelf. But the largest share of the government's revenues come from tax. So we're not an oil economy. The biggest share is the tax. Norway's tax ratio, or tax to GDP, is higher than the OECD average, but it's maybe not as high as some think. In 2019, Norway's tax revenue was 40% of the GDP, while the OECD average was 34%. So it's a bit higher, but it's not rocket sky high. And the tax is a mix of income tax, VAT, and taxes on wealth and property. VAT is actually what gives the government the most money. Our VAT is 25%. The government is committed to a sustainable welfare society achieved by restructuring the Norwegian economy, facilitating growth, and transition to green economy, more jobs, social mobility. And we use our tax policy actively to reach these goals. Our tax base is large due to the high percentage of people who work. So that's also a good thing about having the entire population and not just half of it in the work market. Green energy is our future. There's no doubt about that. We all have to go renewable. But still, we cannot get sufficient energy from only renewables. And oil and gas will play a major role for probably a few more decades. You will know that we have sucked away much of the revenue from our oil and gas industry in the government pension fund. And here's the market value, $1.3 trillion. The fund was created in 1990, and it was set up to give the government room to maneuver if oil prices should drop, or if the mainland economy should contract. It also serves as a tool to manage the financial challenges of an aging population and an eventual future drop in petroleum revenue. The fund was designed to be invested for the long term, but in a way that made it possible to draw on it when required, which we did during the pandemic to put money back into the economy. And today it is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. You saw the total value, and actually the fund owns almost 1.5% of all shares in the world's listed companies. So we have holdings in around 9,000 companies spread among 74 countries. North America represents around 40% of the fund's holding. So we are actually among the top 10 owners of stocks in the big companies in the US. We're among top 10 in Apple, Tesla, Ford, just to mention a few examples. We invest responsibly, and we are in this for the long term. So the oil and gas reserves that we are exploiting today should not just, it doesn't just belong to Norwegians of today, but also to future generations. And that is why there is a broad political consensus in Norway to spend only a small percentage, up to 3% of the fund's gains every year, only the gains, not the capital. So the fund keeps growing, and the politicians are all very responsible. They all agree on this. We're just spending a small percentage of the gain every year. What is the future of the Norwegian system? The government recently published a white paper on this topic, looking 40 years into the future. And let me give you some of the highlights from that white paper. It concluded that today there are 4 people of working age behind every person of retirement age. In 2060, there will only be 2 working people behind every of retirement. So as in the US, pension and healthcare expenditures are rising. At the same time, we will see in Norway that revenues from oil and gas activities will decline. That is natural, and it's an expected part of the transition to a greener economy. So that is where this pension fund comes in, and that will help us a lot. But we cannot just depend on a fund and money in the bank or in shares. We have to develop new industry, and the development of green tech will help offset the decline in oil and gas, and that process has long since begun. So a few words on the green tech. Norway is at the forefront. 98% of the electricity production in Norway comes from renewable energy sources. Hydropower is, of course, the primary source. Hydropower was the basis for Norwegian industry, and actually, thanks to hydropower, we could develop a welfare society, since we started using the rivers and the waterfalls to produce energy in the late 1800s. We are exporting and importing power to and from neighboring countries, demanding on demand, but we do actually export hydropower. In all of Europe, we produce the greatest share of electricity from renewable sources. And as Eivind mentioned, we are a global leader in the adaptation of electric vehicles, our cars, and that is in large part due to healthy tax incentives given to consumers. So last year, more than half of all new cars sold were electric, and you might remember how that upset Will Ferrell. He was so angry. He punched the globe and declared war on Norway. He shouldn't do that. We have 52 of these aircrafts, the F-35, so we can take him back. But we're not just going electric on land. As of 2019, we also have the world's first all-electric ferry. And we are moving to electrify all ferries. We have also taken major steps forward in the cutting-edge area of carbon capture and storage. Last September, the government launched the most ambitious climate project in our history. It is called Longship. It is a massive carbon capture and storage project, which combines new technology and cooperation between industry and government. It's named after the famous Viking longships. And this project captures the CO2, transports it by ship to a terminal on Norway's west coast, and stores it deep underground in reservoirs on the continental shelf. The project will first focus on capturing CO2 from a cement factory. And you might not know that, but globally, the cement industry emits about 7% of all emissions. 7% of all the emissions of CO2 comes from the cement industry. So if we can successfully capture that CO2, that would actually be of great importance. So we're eager to see how this will work, and we're eager to see how the developing CCS industry comes together to innovate and to create new jobs and to help solve the climate challenge. Another new exciting industry is offshore wind. And this is an area where Norway and the US face many of the same challenges in order to install these windmills. One of the challenges is deep water. The Pacific coast, continental shelf here in the US is considerably deeper than many other areas where offshore wind is adopted today. You might know that the Norwegian company Equinor is already granted a license to develop windmills outside the coast of New York, the East Coast. They have two projects there, the Empire and the Beacon, and they will, they are huge projects. But the challenges there are not the same as on the West Coast, because the West Coast has this extremely deep shelf. Norway also has a deep shelf, and we have decades of experience in the offshore and maritime industry on deep shelf. And we are using that experience and that competence and that know-how to develop world-leading technologies for floating windmills. So that is the future probably of the west coast of the US, having installed floating windmills. I just mentioned the East Coast projects, the Empire Wind, which will give power to more than 1 million homes in the New York district. The government is projecting a lack of, well, we need to create jobs, and we would like to see more private sector jobs, and we need to ensure that people can join labor force. So we think that a strong, diverse and green business sector is a key to providing people with jobs and also at the same time helping us save the planet and making us being able to keep the standards of living that we have gotten so used to. Norway has a high trust society, and we're also a very digital society, and we have relatively high employment, we have low unemployment, and we have healthy labor relations, we have robust public finances, and we will certainly do what we can to help the world solve the climate crisis, and we will be able to do that with green technology that we will be happy to export and technological know-how. I will stop there, and then we would have time for questions and discussion.